conversation or topic today is going to be how to deal with your boss. Talk about how prevalent employee complaints are about the boss. How often, have you dealt with that with coworkers or you found yourself complaining about your boss throughout your career?
Especially if they've just left a job, if they weren't happy, then I think you do see that a lot.
I think it probably depends on the stage of your career. I think that those that are younger maybe tend to complain a little bit more. And as you become more seasoned, I think you recognize that there may be pitfalls, especially if you've moved from job to job in doing exactly that. And so I get it more from the younger generation than the older generations.
Experience and research is that people don't leave their jobs, right? They leave their bosses,
Mhm.
and so it becomes actually very prevalent. Water cooler talk and colleague talk to just complain. This is not a good boss. My boss did this. I can't believe it. And I've experienced it pretty frequently.
Yeah, I think inevitably it always gets back to the boss. If you're complaining about the boss, a lot of times you go to somebody that you think you can trust
Hmm.
and you say things sometimes that you regret,
Hmm.
and it does end up getting back to the boss. So I always feel like if there is a diplomatic way to express yourself with your boss and share your concerns,
Hmm.
that's always the best approach than to just kind of let it fester.
Yeah. And I think there's often the assumption that the person that's complaining believes the person they're complaining to feels the same way about the boss, and so there's kindred spirits, and sometimes they do, right? And sometimes they don't, and so it makes the other person uncomfortable, and it makes the person complaining just not look very good, right, within the organization. So there's watch outs there from that perspective.
I also have seen where there are certain teams or like almost like a culture that allows it and a culture that doesn't. And so to your point, Tracy, if there's other ways to express grievances or concerns, then it provides another outlet. But if that outlet's not there, then it can kind of just become the norm to complain. And then that complaining spirals into more complaining to where it becomes more commonplace.
That's a good point, Paige. I think culture is really important. I think that's one of the ways that you can really sustain a work team is by building that culture and having it be a positive culture where things are openly addressed and um, you get that honesty within the team to start with. And I think it makes a big difference.
Do you guys
Yeah.
sometimes feel that being in HR, you're sheltered from some of the concerns that employees have about their bosses? Like you're not, if there's a real problem with a specific manager, for example, that you may be one of the last to find out because people are hesitant to come to you in HR to complain about their boss?
That's Stephanie. That's a really interesting question because yeah, I think it's kind of the barbell strategy, right? Which is either on one side, to your point, never hear about the complaints. On the other side, first person to hear about the complaints is HR, right? Going to the boss or going to HR and saying, "This is what happened with my boss. This is what happened," because then there's that feeling of the safe space to come to HR and say, I have a really difficult time working with my boss, or my boss just did this. So it's I think it's two ends of a continuum on that one is my experience.
As a human resources professional, we have people coming to us asking us to intervene with their
Mhm.
boss.
Hmm.
And that's typically, it depends on, what the concern is. Obviously, if it's of a legal nature, then I would take a different path. But in most cases, I'm advising them on tips for them to go back and work with their boss instead of HR intervening. 'Cause I think sometimes when an employee bypasses their boss may be unaware of how the employee is feeling. And when they bypass their boss and go to human resources or go around them to their superior, their boss, then trust is eroded.
Mm.
And it's very hard to get that trust back once you've done that. I think it's better, Steve, to your earlier point, to just have candid, open conversation with your boss about how you're feeling and a way, work together on a way to improve it.
Have you shared this with your boss? Have you had this
Mm-hmm.
conversation? And almost always it's no, I haven't. So there's that I don't know if fear is too strong of a word, reticence to share any issues with the boss because the boss has so much control, right? So much control from a compensation perspective, from a performance perspective, from a reputation perspective. It's difficult. It's difficult to share feedback with the boss about what's not working.
If there is a way, I think, within an organization to share that the expectation is that there's going to be open conversations at every level, that there's an open door process, I think that helps facilitate those conversations.
What are some ways that y'all have seen that go well? Like, I feel like there's a difference between saying we have an open door policy and then actually like ushering people into that door to make sure they're expressing themselves.
One of the things that I do is encourage one-to-one meetings between the supervisor and the subordinate. If they're routine, then it just opens the door to having candid conversations. So you're not just talking with somebody when you have a problem with them. You have something on the calendar and you're meeting every week or every other week for an hour. And during that meeting, you will have already decided what you're going to talk about during that meeting. So you might be talking about what's going on for the week, what are the objectives, where do you need help, where do you need support, but also maybe talking about what has gone well for you during the week and what hasn't. And it's just an easy way to start a dialogue about what might be frustrating you and then talk it through with the boss on, how can they help you move forward with that problem.
I was going to add that circling back to complaining about the boss, whenever employees see their boss as a person, then as opposed to like assuming that every decision they don't like from their boss is because their boss is bad and kind of making that fundamental attribution error. They can see their boss as a person that's having to make decisions based on all these other factors. So I think humanizing the boss can kind of make it not be this big scary person that's in charge of all these decisions, but someone who's also trying to do their job. And so hopefully it can help minimize some of that complaining whenever people recognize that.